Welcome to Energy Stew. This is Peter Roth, your host. And I'd like to ask you, how many trees are you friendly with? What kind of friendships do you have with the tree world and the nature world in addition? But maybe there's more to know about the life of forests and trees than we realize, and might make us more excited about making friends out there. And so to help us know more about this wonderful world of the brilliance of forests is an author who wrote a book that I love called Why Can't We Be More Like Trees? They're the ancient masters of cooperation, kindness, and healing. I love that. And this is the right person to talk to, Judith Polich. Judith, welcome to Energy Stew.
Well, hello, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to talk with you because I love the whole subject of what trees are about that humanity hasn't figured out until recently.
Absolutely. About 30 years ago, I think, is when we started to get a much better understanding of what happens in a forest community and the extensive nature of that community. And that happened, it began with a researcher named Susan Simond, who was a forest ecologist and started using technology to actually look at in a molecular way what happens beneath the ground. We only see above the ground, right? We know there's roots down there and we know there's some type of interaction, but we had no idea what happens deeper down. And her research opened the door to that. And one of the things that she discovered is that not only is there interaction between tree roots, an exchange of information and food sugar that is generated through photosynthesis from one tree to another to different plants throughout the whole community. There's also interaction with the fungal community that has this extensive network, microbial network interacting with the roots. Well, sugar transfers from roots to the microbial network to other trees, information transfers, minerals are transferred. There's a whole ecosystem underneath there that is extremely complex and cooperative.
Right, and that's the point, is that when you really can study this and watch the exchange of nutrients between the roots and the mycelium, you can see how trees support each other, what good neighbors they are.
They're good neighbors, and remember, many of them have lived together for decades, hundreds of years in some cases, and they also support their offspring. So there's food going from the tree, the larger tree, into its roots and out through the network into its offspring, who can be pretty dispersed. It's going to neighbors. Sometimes they feed trees that aren't well. They feed trees of other species. And of course, this isn't just the forest community. This happens in savannas and all plant communities as well.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I was thinking that when there's a forest fire and forests burn down, I can't imagine that the roots in the mycelium are destroyed. And
well, it depends. I mean, some of the forest fires we have now are so hot that they do burn and destroy the soils under the ground and the validity of those soils. And it takes a long time for that to be reestablished, unfortunately.
right. And then there are even stumps of old trees, of very old trees, that still have wisdom, that their roots and the
There's interesting bit of research on some of that, where some older stumps of large trees are still being fed. There's something happening underground. They're still being fed in a certain way. And so they're still connected to the whole tree network. It's quite a lovely story.
I know that's the whole thing about this is that it's such a beautiful community that honors its past, like these
Mhm.
old trunks, but also supports each other because they're, I mean, let's talk about consciousness. Where is the consciousness that knows which trees need more help than others?
I mean, it's really hard to talk about trees without using words like intelligence, consciousness, and cognition. But we have to be so careful because those words have a special meaning to us as humans, and we have special ways of perceiving consciousness and cognition that are very much human-based. Well, when you look at something like a plant or a tree, you kind of scratch your head and say, well, what's going on here? Is this cognition? There's an indication of cognition, but certainly not cognition the way we think about it. They seem to do some mathematics in terms of how they transfer food. I mean, nothing's wasted, so everything is calculated in terms of how things are transferred within a forest network. There's ways of knowledge that we can't quite comprehend, and indications of some type of consciousness. We know that plants can be sedated, so that may be some indication of consciousness, but not consciousness, certainly the way we think of consciousness within ourselves. We know they can learn.
Well, that's the point. I think humans have to get out of their own way and how we think, and understanding that trees, the brilliance of trees and their root systems, et cetera, doesn't have to have any of the intelligence that we have in the way that we have it, because we're so linear.
We're
And
very linear. We're very linear. And one of the things that fascinates me about how forests seem to interact, the deep ecology of the forest, is that perhaps they perceive things more holistically than we're able to, in that they're taking the needs of the whole community into account. And maybe we can learn something from that.
well, I think we need to. But that's, the next time anybody is in a forest, just to think that it's all alive under their feet in ways that have a lot to do with caring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think many of us love to walk in a forest, and we have our special places that are energetically very rich for us. And I've kind of tried to extend my viewpoint deeper and deeper down in, realizing I only see half of what's going on. And
Well,
if I
I
can,
mean, you can't think of that in quantity, maybe in quality, but outwardly, when we look at trees, we don't realize what the intelligence, let's call it intelligence, that's supporting them is doing minute by minute to keep them vibrant. And they have communication systems that they warn
Mhm.
each other, and
Susan Simon coined the term wood wide web for the network of communication that happens below the ground. The transfer of not just food, but electrical impulses and chemical impulses through the root network and through the fungi network, which can cover miles below the ground.
right, and they have communication abilities, which when we call it a wood wide web, it really is like our internet web, where there's so much they know about each other.
That's right. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of information, and they have some of the same neurotransmitters that we have in our brains. They have some of the same chemical and electrical functioning that our brains have. I'm not that they're not that they're like us or anything, but there's similarities, and it's like hard to ignore that something really interesting is happening there.
Yeah, I love it. And it's, I think the idea is a discovery path of wanting to know more and more and more and more, so that we can really become closer friends with our forests and appreciate. Not that we can sense, they have so many things that they can do that they give off light signals
Mhm.
and smells.
They have a lot of senses that we don't have.
Right,
Uh,
the light signals aren't lights that we can see
right.
or in the spectrum,
Hmm.
and it can be an infrared spectrum.
So it's kind of hard to deny that there isn't some type of intelligence there. Um, we just don't, we haven't deciphered it.
Right. Well, in the old days, there was that book, The Secret Life of Plants,
Hmm.
that showed that you can actually get them to respond to you, like if, because they were like electric leads put on the leaves,
Mm.
and this guy who was doing this work, if he walked into the room with a can of water,
Hmm.
the plant would all of a sudden start to create an energy of
Mm.
what would be known as happiness.
Mm.
Or if you walk into a room with a match that's lit, all of a sudden the plant,
Mm.
and the fact that you're just walking in the room, you're not going up and burning the plant, you're just
Right.
in the vicinity that the plant is aware of.
Well, we know that plants react to injury. I mean, basically, if there's a puncture on a tree, they're going to throw sap in there, just like our blood would flow to clog a wound. I mean, there's responses that happen to stimuli throughout nature. I mean, that's pretty something that's pretty well documented. We know they can hear. Uh, they seem to like certain types of music rather than other types of music, and
Wow.
been documented as well, that they'll grow better, say with classical music than hard rock. Things like that. I mean, we have so much to fathom here.
Right. And I wonder about how sensitive the animal kingdom is to the plant kingdom, how much they respond to it and are aware of it in ways that we have no idea.
I have no idea. That's a whole other area of research. Fascinating, but um, I don't know. Obviously, plants evolved very differently than animals did. And one of the reasons is because they photosynthesize, they produce their own food, right? So they're self-sufficient in the way that animals are not. Animals like us and all other animals were predatory by nature because we have to be. We have to eat a plant or eat an animal that eats a plant. Everything's dependent, goes back to being dependent on plants, but the evolutionary cycle for us has been very different.
Right. And so I wonder how plants feel about being food.
That I don't know.
Right.
But I'll tell you one thing, and what some of this research has, and there's been so much research, so much interesting research over the last 20, 30 years, has made me clear on is that we have to stop thinking that everything's just a commodity for our use. And we have to start to perceive things in a much broader ecosystem, more holistic perspective to see where we fit in within the larger whole. And obviously, we're going to continue to eat plants and animals that eat plants. I mean, we're not going to suddenly learn to photosynthesize, but we can certainly learn to be more respectful in the way we interact with other species. And maybe a little more ecocentric rather than anthropocentric.
How do they, how do you think they feel when we hug them?
I don't know, but I do like to hug trees. Their perceptual systems are much slower than ours. And sometimes when I'm just leaning up against a tree, I think I have to sit there for a long time before I sense anything coming back. But what I may be just sensing is the deeper way in which I am relaxing being in a beautiful forest community.
Right. So, when we think about forests being conscious, can we imagine them being self-conscious?
That's, again, that's a difficult question because we're looking at it from our perspective. Certainly plants know where they stand within the forest community. They know where they're situated. They have a sense of, where they end and where something else begins. That doesn't mean they're self-conscious, because I don't even know what self-consciousness would mean in a plant. I mean, we're just,
Well, it might be that when a plant when a plant is threatened,
yes,
it's conscious of the threat.
it's conscious of the threat. Yeah, it's conscious of danger. It's conscious of an invasive insect species that is eating their leaves, and it will respond accordingly, but that's not the same as self-consciousness,
Right.
which implies a sense of self, and knowledge of that sense of self. I don't find references for that
Maybe it's
except,
hard to define even for humans.
yeah, really.
Oh, it's fascinating. Um, and you come from a real background as a youngster, living up in northern Wisconsin.
Right. I grew up on a dairy farm, an isolated dairy farm, and I used to spend a lot of time in the forest pasture near our farm that was owned by my aunt. And in fact, there was a big oak tree there that I used to hang out with. Some years later when I went back, it just wasn't all that big anymore.
Right?
But it was my playground. The woodland was my playground when I was a kid.
These,
And I always felt wonderful there. I always felt peaceful. I always felt taken care of. It was just naturally calming.
my brother and I, when we were about 10 and 11, we were always up in trees. We just loved to climb trees and hang out up in them. And it just felt like that was our home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then when we were in summer camp for a number of summers up in the Berkshires, um, there was a pine grove,
Mm-hmm.
and the pine grove was the big socializing area. And it was so wonderful to be in this pine grove with other people, and you really felt the warmth of the nature of it, and it was, it's
Yeah,
wonderful.
in a way, it embraces us and takes us in. And we've learned a lot about all the ways nature heals us, the way it calms us, calms our minds, the way it helps us reduce stress. And it's a wonderful, um, that's why many of us love to hang out in nature, because it is restorative. Our world is so crazy that we normally live in, we're bombarded by so much information. We need time in nature just to calm ourselves, just to come back to our center. That's why nature is such a wonderful healer.
But also, nature provides so many nutrients that not just for food, but for healing that are amazing. And that's why there have been so many forays into the jungles, like in South
Mhm.
America, to look for plants that have magical properties. So then the pharmaceutical companies can come and take advantage of it. But
Pharmaceuticals and all kinds of natural healing products. Well,
yeah, yeah,
we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for plants. I mean, obviously, they provide all the oxygen that we need to breathe. They've created the atmosphere that we live in. Uh, they have essentially terraformed the earth so that there's soil that all plants can grow in. They provide through photosynthesis, they provide food not just for us, but for everybody. They're responsible for the water cycle. I mean, without plants, it wouldn't just be like living in a desert. It would be like living on Mars.
What a great profession that would be to, I'm past going to school, but I was thinking if I was young, I would just love to get involved in the science of nature. And
Well, it's interesting because um, there are less and less graduate students studying plants, even though more of them should be. Animals are more interesting, more fascinating. There's more research money, right? But to me, there's this whole arena that we know so little about that we need so much more research on that can help us live in a thoughtful way on this planet. But the fact is, there isn't as much research money for studies of things like plant neurology. Some people say, well, that isn't even possible. There could be such a thing because, again, they're thinking of a brain like ours, right? How could a plant have a neurological system even?
right, but the people who learn about it, I guess what it is that there's not that much exposure, and
Right,
you know,
right.
and
I mean,
also I'm thinking of a friend of mine who I've known for many years, who was in forestry out
mhm.
west, and I'm thinking that one of the issues he had, people who like him really understand the magic of the forest, are up against the commercial world and are always
Commercial
trying to
world,
be
the
ignorant,
quantification of everything, right? How many board feet in that tree? That's
among other
the
things. Yeah.
thing, right?
And also just the idea of cutting down swaths of land for populations without realizing how
What we're doing.
nature supports everything.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think a deeper understanding of how forest systems and plant systems work are one way that we can begin to address the climate crisis. And we can't do any of this without plants, frankly.
No, I love the whole idea of understanding what they contribute to us on many levels, and how much we should nurture them in ways that they're not used to.
Well, a part of it will be just good management practice. Instead of doing clear cuts and planting monoculture plants, harvest thoughtfully, leave the large trees there, and restore, regreen, rewild everything we can. I mean, that's how we get out of this.
Right. So what I'm excited about talking with you is that maybe more and more people who hear an interview like this can find new purposes for themselves.
I hope so, because not only is it exciting, it's essential. And, in addition to my book, I also write a climate change column that I've done for almost 5 years now. I live in New Mexico, so it's published in the Albuquerque Journal, but it's on my website and people can go there and get a lot more information on how to get engaged and how to cut their own carbon footprints. That's the name of my website, Cutting Your Carbon Footprint. And it has a lot of information on the book, and also on they can download all the articles.
I love that. And you have many chapters that we haven't even delved into in your book. And so at some point, I want to call you again.
I hope so. It'd be fun to talk with you again, Peter, and take a walk in the forest together.
Well, that would be wonderful. I'm in New York City, But right now I'm looking at the trees in Riverside Park. It's right next to the Hudson River. And I've become friendly with them. I mean, I love that they're neighbors of mine.
Have a special place to walk and to be and to relax in nature. And it's also wonderful to take the new knowledge that we're getting from some of these incredible researchers with us when we go walk in the woods. I mean, it's great to take binoculars. We can see a lot further. If we take a deeper understanding of what's really going on, we can see a lot deeper.
Yeah, and that's the point. It's seeing the forest more of as our friends rather than just an opportunity to to appreciate nature, but not to realize what a wonderful community it is.
Well, they can also be great teachers because I think we have something to learn about how a real ecosystem functions. And we can learn that by getting a deeper understanding of the exchange that happens within a forest community that expresses behaviors that we think of as cooperation, kindness, even altruism. I mean, things that we aspire to as humans.
Right.
And
For
very
instance,
different in form, but nevertheless.
but for instance, in the book, you talk about trees that are dying, and in their dying stage, they're sending out nutrients all over the place that they don't need anymore.
That's right. They dump all of their stored food so that everybody else in the community can make use of it.
That's so
That's very well documented.
I love that. So this has been so wonderful talking with you, and it's joyful actually to talk about trees and forests and how much alive they are.
Well, let's do it again. And, people can find out about me and my work on my website, which is cuttingyourcarbonfootprint.com. And of course, about the book, Why Can't We Be More Like Trees?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Judith Polich. You're a wonderful guest, and I'm so glad to talk with you.
And we shall do so again soon, I hope, Peter.
I hope so. Thank you.
Bye now.
And this is Peter Roth, your host of Energy Stew at prn.live. I can be reached at peter@heartriver, HEART river.org. Love to hear from you, and thanks so much for listening.